Hey friends, it's Anna, and today we have a very exciting video. We are gonna flip through all the completed spreads in my reading journal. Look at how big this thing got from all the collaging, junk journaling, all the pictures I pasted in. It definitely got pretty chunky, and I'm so excited to see all my completed spreads of 2024 all together. This is a square journal from Archer and Olive, one I got a few years ago, and I actually used this for both my 2023 and 2024 reading journal, so that's why my first page here is my 2023 cover page. But let's go ahead and flip to the middle here for our 2024 spreads. So this is the chunk we're gonna flip through in this video, and I also do have a reading journal flip through for 2023 if you want to see all these pages. But sit back, get cozy, and let's look at some journal spreads. As you can see here, these are my cover pages for 2024, so I just have my title that I did with my label printer and a quote. This is from Cicero. I love this quote: "A room without books is like a body without a soul," and I printed out a picture of a big library to go behind it, which I thought was really fitting. My theme for my setup pages was kind of a dark academia, vintage, neutrals sort of vibe, and any pictures you see throughout the pages, most of them I probably found on Pinterest. So first we're going to go through all of my 2024 setup pages, and then we'll get into monthly spreads and spreads for each of the books I read. On the left here, I have my 2024 book count, which I actually exceeded. I made 63 squares and I ended up reading 68 books in 2024. So I got to fill all of these out and exceed my reading goal, which I'm very proud of. Over here, I had some specific reading goals that I actually did pretty well on. I wanted to finally read some of the Bronte sister books, and I did read Jane Eyre this year. That's the only one I got to, but I'm hoping to get to Wuthering Heights maybe early in 2025. I didn't do well on my Russian literature goal. I wanted to read War and Peace and Anna Karenina. I have been meaning to read War and Peace for so many years, and the size is just so intimidating, so I keep on putting it off, but one day I will read that book. I did really well on my popular fantasy goal, so I finally read ACOTAR for the first time this year. I read the Cruel Prince trilogy, the Once Upon a Broken Heart. You guys will see I actually made a spread specifically for fantasy I read over the summer, because I definitely went through a romantasy binge. And then I also finally got into the Brandon Sanderson world. I read the first 3 Mistborn books, and those were so good. I'm so excited to continue with all his books in 2025. And then I read 2 nonfiction books. So overall, pretty good on my reading goals that I set at the beginning of the year. I did not do as well in my 24 books for 2024 spread. I think I only read, 4 of these, so pretty low percentage. And I actually adjusted this spread a little bit in my 2025 setup. If you want to watch my new journal setup, you can see how I adjusted this to where I think it'll work a little bit better for me next year. Moving on to my 2024 reading log, and this is just kind of a bulk summary for all my reading for the year. So I just listed out every single book in order with a few key stats. So the dates that I was reading each book, the page count or hour count for audiobooks, the format, so physical or audio, and then my rating. And I actually ran out of space on this page because I read a lot more books than I was expecting to, so I made a little flap here to accommodate the extra books. So it goes to 60 books, and then this little flap has books 61 through 68. And this is just a really nice reference if I ever want to quickly see every single book I read this year. They're all listed here. here is my book bracket, and I got this spread idea from Plant-Based Bride. This is kind of like a tournament style bracket to determine my favorite book of the whole year. So you can see at the top each month I went through and chose my favorite book of that month, and then January and February squared off and I chose my favorite of those, March and April squared off, and then so on to where I got my top 6, top 3, and then my final favorite book of 2024. I'm realizing now that all of my top books were either fantasy or like classic women's literature. Like we have Dance of Thieves and then Little Woman and then Caraval and Mistborn, but then Jane Eyre and Anne of Green Gables. So that's kind of a funny theme, but I guess it's pretty indicative of my favorite types of books. And then my top 3 were Little Woman, Caraval, and Jane Eyre. And then my final favorite book of the whole year ended up being Little Woman. And I actually printed out a little book cover here, so I'm gonna paste this in. I own the Union Square special edition of Little Woman, so I printed out that cover specifically. On to my last spreads for my 2024 setup, and then we'll get into the monthly spreads. I had a book acquisition page because I wanted to kind of track my book buying habits, and I actually did a lot better than I was expecting. I only bought 18 books this year, which I feel like is pretty good for me. I think this might be lower than what it has been in previous years. And I also tracked where I got them, the price, and if I read them this year, which this was a big thing I wanted to focus on, actually reading the books I buy and not just buying a ton of books that then sit on my shelves for years and years before I finally get to them. And I actually did really good on this. I read or started 16 of the 18 books I bought. So that's pretty awesome. I'm very proud of myself for that. And then lastly, I have this book club spread. I'm in a book club with some of my friends, so I like to just make a list of all the books together. So I printed out the covers of each of those and pasted those here. Now getting into our monthly spreads after we have a blank page. I always tend to leave blank pages after my initial setup in case I want to add more spreads, and then I almost never end up using them, so I should probably just stop doing that. But here we are in January. This is kind of the usual format I use for most of my monthly setups. We have a cover page that's just to set the overall theme and vibe for the month, and then I have kind of a summary page with the book covers that I read, and then some stats that I like to track. And you'll see at the very end of this flip through, I compile all of these monthly stats into final end of year stats, so I get to see these for the entire year and some additional stats that I get from the reading log as well. So that's one of my favorite spreads to look at. But as you can see, in January, I went with a very cool toned, wintry, cozy vibe for my theme. And I will try to link all the supplies that I regularly used in this journal in the description box below, and I'll try to call out specific supplies that I used on each spread just in case you're curious. So in this setup for January, I think I was using the frozen wide tape from the WASHI tape shop, and then these little WASHI stickers here are also from the WASHI tape shop. This is their tea set. I'm not sure what it's called, but I'll link it in the description along with all the other WASHI tapes and stickers and stamps and everything that I regularly use in this journal. So as you can see, I also make a spread for each book I read. Sometimes they're a half page or a full page, depending on how much I had to say. We kind of get more compressed as the journal goes on because I was starting to run out of room. But in the beginning, I was devoting a lot of full pages to the books I really loved. And then sometimes I do a little TBR spread for the books I want to read the following month, or I'll do a little check-in spread. You'll see that. February was a month of fantasy, so I wanted to have kind of a vintage fantasy look for these pages. I also print out these stats with Canva, so I enter them into the little graph functions they have on Canva, and then just take a snapshot and paste them into a Google Doc. I'm so sad that I don't really like my spreads for the Dance of Thieves duology, which is just sad since I love these books so much. I wish I enjoyed looking at this spread more, but I think my handwriting is a little too messy on this one. And then of course for my Divine Rivals spreads, I really like how these turned out, even though I didn't really love those books very much, but I guess that's just how it goes sometimes. So here I have another, oh my gosh, my page is literally coming out. Wow, I'm gonna need to figure out a way to fix that. You guys will see at the end, the spine is kind of broken on this journal too. So I asked a few videos ago for some tips on binding it, and you guys were very helpful. So one day I am planning on fixing the whole binding of this journal too, because I'm thinking it'll be something I will love to flip through for years and years to come. But anyways, I have another kind of like reading check-in at the end of this month. So books I was carrying over from February to March, and then I had my first DNF. I love March's cover page and this theme. This is the Floral Chronicles tape from the Washi tape shop. It's so pretty, and I love pairing it with this light pink. I didn't end up doing a spread for the bullet journal method because I was gonna do like a whole nonfiction set of spreads because I had a few nonfiction books I wanted to read in the beginning of the year. So I was saving it for that, and then I didn't even end up reading any more of those nonfiction books, so this just turned into a blank page. And then we have my fall TBR, which is not only upside down, but is between March and April, which is not fall time at all. But at the end of my journal, I really started to run out of space, and so when I wanted to do a fall TBR, I figured I'd just go back and use some of the blank pages that I had earlier, and then I accidentally put it upside down. So I think I'll come back to this later when it's actually like fall in the journal and show you guys, and I'll flip it around so you can actually see it. April is one of my favorite cover pages. I wanted to do a cottagecore theme because I filmed a cottagecore reading vlog this month, so I had a lot of books on that theme. So I was using the Cottage Charm washi tape set from the Washi tape shop, and I love these little kind of like Polaroids that I put a bunch of pieces of the tape in to give the idea of some cute cottage pictures. I also think this was the month that I read the most books. I read 8 books. I'm pretty sure that's my top month of the year. And I realized that I need to read more cottagecore books because I found so many new favorite books in that video. So I did make a special little group of spreads for that reading vlog. So these are the books that were in that video. Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies ended up being a 5-star for me, and then that's also when I read Little Woman. So that's something I'm definitely going to do again this spring, is specifically try to find some cottagecore themed books. Now we're going a little out of order again because my May spread starts on this next page, but I had this empty space right here at the end of April, and I had 2 more books to fit at the end of May, so I figured I'll just add them here, especially because these 2 books happen to go with the theme for April really well. So it kind of worked out, even though it's a little out of order, but you gotta save space when you're running out of pages. So May is really when I started reading a lot of fantasy. I read the Caraval trilogy in this month, and that kind of just set off a romantasy binge for the rest of the summer. And so I wanted to make my May spreads kind of based on the aesthetic of Caraval, which I love so much. I think the reason I love this series is because of the setting and the overall vibe and aesthetic and the characters. And I also loved the Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy, which I read right afterwards. And I'm really happy with how these cover pages turned out. If you have read Caraval or Once Upon a Broken Heart, I'm sure you will be able to pick up the meaning of all the images in this collage. I kind of wish my actual book spreads for the series turned out a little better. I started to realize that when my writing was really straight and fit nicely around the collage, it looks a lot better. So you guys will see me start to incorporate that in later spreads, and I think my spreads start looking a lot better and a little less messy. And then here's my Once Upon a Broken Heart trilogy spreads. I loved the aesthetic and overall vibe of this series too. It was a perfect light fairy tale. Okay, now getting into, I think this is my favorite section of spreads for the entire year. I got a little behind on my journal in the summer. I didn't do a June or July because we were traveling a lot and we also moved. So at the end of the summer, I decided to just do a special little spread for all the fantasy books I read over the summer because there were a lot of them. And then I did a separate grouping of spreads of all the books that weren't fantasy. But for these fantasy spreads, I really wanted like a light, summery fairy tale aesthetic, and I love how it turned out. I was using these books and lace stickers from Leela Journals, so you'll see that throughout the spreads. I was also using her frame stickers, and I just love how all of these colors turned out together and the light academia fantasy feel to it. So this was when I read the Cruel Prince trilogy, and I'm so happy with this group of spreads. I feel like the colors on these look really good because they're so cohesive. And this is what I'm talking about with like making my writing a lot neater and having defined edges around the collages. I think that makes a big difference in the reading journal. And then I think my ACOTAR pages are my favorite of all. I switched to this fairy tale type font for all the titles, which I love how that turned out. And then I found some really pretty fan art to include too. I had been meaning to read this series for so long. It's all over my Instagram and TikTok and BookTube, and I actually enjoyed it way more than I thought I would. I had my doubts about the romantasy genre before this year, but I did find some really big hits within that genre. This series, The Cruel Prince, Caraval, Dance of Thieves, those were probably my favorites. And then we have Lightworks, which I did not so much like, and I kind of awkwardly added in here with all the ACOTAR spreads because I read that right after the series, but that one definitely didn't compare to all the other ones I read over the summer. Now moving on to that group of spreads for the other books I read over the summer or in June and July, which weren't fantasy. Again, I'm going for a very summery vibe for these spreads. I kind of tend to match the season with my themes throughout the journal, and I'm also a very seasonal reader, so that usually tends to go with the books I'm reading as well. I had a really good summer of reading because I loved all those fantasy books, and then the other 4 books I read were so good too. The Reading List is a wonderful book if you like reading books about books and about the power and joy of reading. This captures that so well. And then I was meaning to read some more Kristen Hanna books. I read The Nightingale by her several years ago. I think that was in 2019. And for a while I'd been meaning to pick up her other books. So I finally read The Great Alone, which was amazing. Kristen Hanna never fails to crush my soul in her books. Then we have Beneath a Scarlet Sky. This was one of my 5 stars. This was actually a reread. I chose this for one of my book club picks because I wanted my book club to experience the greatness of this book. This is probably one of my favorite World War II historical fictions, along with The Nightingale. So if you like historical fiction, I would definitely recommend this one. And then we have Lessons in Chemistry, which was really popular a few years ago. Getting back into kind of my normal format of monthly setups, I went ahead and started the fall vibes for August because I was already very much in that mindset when I was setting up these spreads. And I love this caffeine canvas tape from the WASHI tape shop and this dusty blue and cinnamon tape. I think they go really well together and are perfect for fall spreads. And I continue to use those throughout all my book spreads because I just could not get enough of those tapes. This is also when I started the Mistborn series, which I think I rated all the books in the series 4 stars, but looking back, it's probably like a 5-star series overall in my mind. So I am planning on continuing with the Wax and Wane series next year, and then maybe I'll get to the Stormlight archives as well. Eventually, I do want to make my way through the whole Cosmere. This is also when I started rereading Harry Potter, and since I've read Harry Potter so many times, I don't make normal spreads for those books. I usually just decorate them, and this year I thought it'd be fun to choose a specific Hogwarts class for each book and decorate it based on that. So for the first one, I chose Charms. Getting into September and sticking more with a fall aesthetic for all the spreads. I have another Kristen Hanna book, The Woman. This was a 5-star read. It was so good. Her writing and character development is just so unmatched. She's such a talented writer. And LMNOP was probably the most unique book I read this year. The premise is about a town whose leadership starts banning alphabetical letters, and the story itself is told through letters, as in like mail that the characters write each other. So as the alphabetical letters get banned, the characters can't use them anymore, which means they disappear from the book. So it gets very interesting when the characters' alphabet starts to get limited. I'm continuing the Mistborn series here. We have some more Harry Potter. And then into October, which I was really trying to embrace the dark academia fall vibes with my reads and with the spreads. This was using the Academia tape set from the WASHI tape shop. I love this book tape. It's absolutely perfect for a reading journal. And this is where I finally started the Discovery of Witches series. This gave me such nostalgia for like the 2010s era of reading where vampires and like paranormal romance was really popular. And then I had a little reading check-in for currently reading and a November TBR. And then on to my final spreads of the year before we get into my end of year stats. I got behind on my journal again. I didn't do a November-December wrap up. So in January, I just went back and made some spreads for all of the end of year reads. So these are all the books I read in November and December. And I actually have decorated all the spreads for those books, but I haven't gone in and written my thoughts yet. So I still need to do that for my final books of the year. But here's what the pages kind of look like before I write in them. And if you're curious on the process of making all these spreads, I do have videos for almost all of the setups in here. So I'll link all my reading journal videos from 2024 below if you want to see the process of setting up any of these pages. Now getting into my end of year spreads, I wanted to make a little bringing into 2025 section because there are a few books I started in 2024 but am probably going to finish in January. I actually have finished The Winter Garden by Kristen Hanna, and I'm almost done with The Covenant of Water. So these are for those books, and then I forgot to print out the cover of one of them, so I still need to go back and add that. Then I made a 2025 highlights spread. So these are all of my 5-star reads. And then I also wanted to highlight that I finally started Mistborn and the Brandon Sanderson universe because that's something I'd been wanting to do for a while. And then also, oh my gosh, I just realized this should say 2024 highlights, not 2025. Okay, well, I'll have to get some whiteout or something and fix that. These are my 2024 highlights, not 2025. I was in that new year mindset, I guess, when I was making these. But yeah, I also started listening to audiobooks in 2024, and I actually listened to 24 audiobooks throughout the whole year, which was a new thing for me when I finally got the Libby app and started getting audiobooks through the library. So that was another thing to celebrate for the year. And then we have my 2024 stats, not 2025. I'm gonna have to fix this one as well. But I love these pages. It's so interesting to me to geek out about all my reading stats, all the numbers and different things you can track with reading. I have so much fun doing that throughout the year. And then it's so exciting for me to see all the totals at the end of the year. So I'll just run through these real quick. Some totals were I read 68 books, and of those, of the physical books, it was 18,509 pages, which is kind of a crazy number, and then 289 hours of audiobooks, which is also a crazy high number. I read 44 different authors, which is pretty interesting to compare to the 68 total books because you can see there were quite a few repeat authors, some series in there, and then I had 6 rereads. I tracked 5 different stats on these pages. So first was genre. This was an overwhelming fantasy year. These actually first 3 categories in the bar chart are all fantasy. I had 20 fantasy, 20 romantasy, and then 2 historical fantasy. That's what I overwhelmingly read this year. I'm hoping next year to kind of branch out a little bit more. I think I read a lot more diversely in 2023, and then this year I just kind of was in my fantasy era, I guess. And then next we had historical fiction, and then just a few each of classics, general fiction, literary fiction, thrillers, nonfiction, romance, and magical realism. Then I like to track the format of the books I read. So the majority were physical books, 35, and then I read, like I said, 24 audiobooks, or I guess listened to 24 audiobooks. And then there were 9 books where I read them partially physically and then also partially listened to. This is a new stat I'm tracking this year, which I didn't track anywhere in the journal. I just actually had to go through all of the books on my log and write each one down. But I wanted to know where I got the book. So if it was a book I already owned at the start of the year, if it's a book I bought this year, if I got it from the library, if I borrowed it from the Libby app, or if it was gifted to me. So of all the books I read this year, here's the breakdown for those categories. And I'm really happy to see how much came from Libby and the library. That was one of the things I was going to focus on at the beginning of the year, was borrowing more from the library as opposed to buying more books. So I think I did a really good job on that, especially with my use of Libby and getting audiobooks. Then we have a rating, which looks pretty good. Most of them were 4 stars, but I actually had more 5 stars than 3 stars, which is pretty crazy. And my average rating overall of all the books I read was 3.88, so I think that's pretty good. Lastly, I tracked how much time it took me to read each book. I had a decent amount, 10 that took me over a month to read. I think a lot of these were also book club books because we meet each week and assign sections for each week, so usually those do take about a month or more. And then actually I'm surprised that most of them were under a week with 27 books. I think this came from a lot of those romantasy series that I was just absolutely tearing through, but it's really interesting for me to see this and how long it typically takes me to get through each book. So these are my final stats, and we used up every single page of the entire journal. This was just some doodles I had for a bullet journal theme one month. So I just barely made it. I hope you guys enjoyed flipping through all these spreads with me. I hope you maybe got some inspiration for your own reading journals. Please let me know what you thought of these spreads, or if you read any of the books in here. I would love to hear your opinions. Thank you guys so much for watching, and happy reading.